water, fire, thunder. We all know Pokémon as a franchise is specifically tied to the concept of elements, far more than most other fantastical settings. Each Pokémon is tied to a type, and can learn dozens of moves directly related to that natural element. So too is this connection referenced through the idea of stones, ultra-powerful and rare minerals that seem to contain concentrated masses of elements, enough to trigger evolution for certain Pokémon. Now, this video is not meant to serve as a theory as to how these stones work, or why certain Pokémon need stones to evolve at all. No, I want to take a step back from the in-universe reasoning for this particular video and ask the question, well, what do some of the non-elemental stones seem to represent? Let's look at the groups of Pokémon that fall under the evolution category for particular stones, and figure out from the designer's perspective what these Pokémon's origins, designs, or lore have in common, since the answers might be more interesting than you think. We can easily attribute reasoning to the groupings of Pokémon that evolve with fire, water, thunder, even leaf stones. These Pokémon that might be seen as characteristic of that element. Not plain designs per se, but ones that are extremely obvious and almost physical representations or mascots of these types. So it is no wonder that these stones are easy to find reasoning for, and have been predictable staples of the franchise for years. But Generations 2 and 4 did something weird, introducing a whole new slew of stones that don't unify Pokémon of the same type in the slightest. No, all of these stones have varied mixes of Pokémon that share these evolution methods, seemingly random picks almost. But I've had this topic on my mind for quite some time, and I was determined to find a pattern or reasoning. So let's begin with the Generation 1 stone, the Moonstone. I have always wondered what unified Pokémon of this stone, because it's not just nocturnal behavior. They aren't literally referencing a need to evolve under the power of the physical moon in most cases, as only a handful of these Pokémon seem to have some kind of nocturnal connection, with Musharna's dreams, and Clefairy living on Mount Moon and congregating under the moonlight. Instead, let's turn to what the moon represents culturally, which is typically femininity. While our understanding of human reproduction and general anatomy is much better now, for most of human history, the lunar cycle was thought to closely mirror the menstrual cycle. Both cycles last roughly 28 days, and the phases of the moon have been used as a way to track the menstrual cycle for centuries. This connection has led to the moon being associated with women's reproductive health and fertility. In many cultures, the moon has been personified as a goddess, such as the Greek goddess Artemis, who was associated with the cycles of the moon, hunting, and childbirth, or Chandra, the Hindu goddess. All of that's to say that the Moonstone works incredibly well for this batch of Pokémon, given that they are visually coded as feminine in many cases, given their pink coloration and gentler personalities, regardless of their actual gender ratios in-game. So in my mind, it's more than fitting that the moon is the unifying symbol for this batch of Pokémon that could be culturally seen as quite feminine, or even displaying feminine traits, such as Nidoqueen being a mother, or both Clefable and Wigglytuff having slight elements of rabbit in their designs. Animals that are also culturally associated with femininity or fertility due to their high reproductive rate relative to other mammals. Plus, in Eastern mythologies, the moon rabbit is a prominent symbol as well, making all these connections all the more perfect in my mind. Next up, what's interesting is that the later introduced but potential counterpart to the moon, the Sunstone, is nearly an elemental stone in my mind. After all, 4 out of the 5 Pokemon it evolves belong to the grass type, even being monotype Pokemon before Generation 6. But if that's the case, then why does this stone even exist, when the Leaf Stone was already there? Well, if you look at the Leaf Stone Pokemon, those seem to represent much more varied parts of the grass element. We've got Vileplume and Victreebel as toxic tropical plants, and then Leafeon, Shiftry, or Simisage, which seem to represent coniferous or evergreen plant life. Often plants like this in real life are more than capable of dramatic growth in darker or colder conditions. These Pokemon seem to be in a constant verdant state, and are referencing the lushness of plants rather than another key aspect of them thematically, their relationship to the sun. Every plant on Earth relies on the sun for photosynthesis, obviously, but a blossoming flower is a much clearer visual representation of this relationship to sunlight and the growth that plants see due to it. So the Sunstone seems to represent Pokemon that need a massive amount of sunlight energy specifically to dramatically bloom and reach their full potential, either sporting actual flowering elements on their bodies or just constant exposure to sunlight to reach their maximum growth. This includes the non-grass type Heliolisk, a Pokemon that reaches its fullest potential when absorbing sun rays in its frills. Next, let's move on to Generation 4 and take a look at the 3 weirdest and most abstract stones, the Shiny Stone. This is the first truly abstract stone that I can offer little more than conjecture on. We've got a lineup that I think is only really unified by one thing: beauty and grace. We even see various Pokemon here use this concept of beauty both in their design, obviously, but even further as a survival mechanism in and of itself. Florges not only camouflages as a bouquet of flowers, but can also control the power of flowers itself, something commonly seen as the pinnacle expression of beauty in human aesthetics. Meanwhile, Togekiss has nearly perfected its form as a bird Pokemon, taking flight in an incredibly aerodynamic way and ditching a more lanky, awkward, juvenile look. Even Roserade's deadly thorns are disguised under a veil of seductive, sweet aroma, similar to a real rose. Again, flowers. We see that these Pokemon are not only perceived as beautiful, but they use our perception of beauty to achieve their highest potential far more than most other Pokemon. Thus, the Shiny Stone is the perfect unifier, as the shiniest stones in real life are often the ones that receive the highest praise or value as gemstones. Second to last, it's time to examine the Dusk Stone, a personal favorite of mine simply due to its connection to my favorite genre of Pokemon: spooky and supernatural. Indeed, 75% of the Pokemon here are ghost types, an easy sign of this grouping. But let's think about why we also have Honchkrow, a Pokemon not a ghost in the slightest, and very much tied to our physical world. Well, I think it's interesting that the vast majority of these Pokemon seem to be unified by their personalities, being naturally mischievous, if not outright vengeful and evil. We get many instances within their Pokédex entries describing at length these Pokemon's violence or mean-spirited survival tactics. Perhaps the Dusk Stone represents a massive amount of negative energy required for evolution, even more than most other Ghost or Dark-type Pokemon. However, this does not explain Aegislash, who is quite the opposite, being a valiant Pokemon capable of sensing nobility and bravery in humans. While this might seem to throw a wrench in this grouping, I think it actually enhances it, as perhaps Doublade's exposure to a massive amount of negative, malevolent energy is the final test that it needs to earn its full valiant form, almost like being knighted and reaching noble enlightenment. Finally, the rarest and most abstract of all the stones, the Dawn Stone. Introduced in Sinnoh, this stone is responsible for the evolution of 2 very different cross-generational families, and nothing more to this day. The meaning for this stone is thus entirely metaphorical, as these 2 Pokemon have nearly nothing in common in any sense. However, it's very clear to me why these 2 share the Dawn Stone. In many mythologies, dawn is considered a time of renewal and new beginnings. In Egyptian mythology, for example, the sun god Ra is reborn every morning at dawn, symbolizing the cyclical nature of life and death. In Hinduism, dawn is associated with the goddess Usha, who represents the renewal of life and the start of a new day. Even in ancient Greek mythology, the goddess Eos is associated with new beginnings and the awakening of the entire world. Both Snorunt and Kirlia have 2 of the most drastic evolutions of any Pokemon in my opinion, with Kirlia going from a childish and feminine form to one that is very masculine and valiant, symbolizing rebirth due to this anatomical change and a noble renewal of the spirit. We see a similar transformation for Snorunt, a very childlike Pokemon that becomes almost like a goddess with a drastically different personality from both Snorunt and Glalie. As such a rare stone with only 2 recorded instances of its use to date, the Dawn Stone is the ultimate proof to me that Pokemon stones are so powerful that they transcend the limitations of typing or even natural biology. Instead, all these Pokemon groupings share abstract personalities, powers, or even further, personality-driven essences, with these stones capturing essential parts of what makes a living creature and its sentient personality special: beauty, revenge, even the potential for spiritual rebirth. At the end of the day, these stone decisions are largely just random game design decisions, designed to give us more varied options for evolution. But I think it's fun to read into them a little bit, and presume that they mean that there's something a little more special about these Pokemon and their full evolutionary potential than the average. And diving into them outside of the perspective of the Pokemon universe itself can actually reveal quite a bit about the complex inspirations of various Pokemon and how they often overlap unexpectedly. What do you think? Let me know your favorite stone down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time for more content.